Wait for somebody to show up. Okay, hi everybody. How are you? I'm Joshua David McKenney. I am the creator of Pidgin Doll. Before I start taking your questions live, I just kind of had a few things I wanted to introduce you guys to and talk to you about. First and most importantly, I wanted to introduce you to my new doll, Blue. Blue is my new sculpt. She is in the Pidgin universe, but she's not Pidgin. She's a new face sculpt and sort of a new body and figure as well, even though they can have clothing interchangeability. Sort of the differences between them abstractly is that Pidgin's face is very heart-shaped and Blue is more tear-shaped. See, she has a very different sort of profile and eye shape. And you can see, whereas Pidgin usually wears a heart on her cheek, Blue wears a tear. This is sort of, before I had her cast in resin, she was cast in 3D printed. So here's another sort of version of her. This is before she had inside eyes, so she's completely painted. But you can see this is kind of more her vibe and aesthetic a little bit. It's a little more melancholy, still very cute and doll-like, but you know, a little sadder. If you guys are interested in following Blue and seeing sort of my processes in creating her, you can do so there. So I'm gonna start seeing if you guys have any questions. I'm gonna try to tune into myself down here on what got me into doll sculpting. You know, it was very sort of organic. I was looking at a lot of pictures of dolls. Before I was a doll sculptor, I was an illustrator. And before I was a professional illustrator, I studied photography. And so there was something about the idea of sculpting and creating sort of the ideas that I was expressing in 2D and putting them into 3D and being able to photograph them. And so it was a very sort of slow process. I started taking a few ceramics classes. I took a class in mold making at the School of Visual Arts, specifically like silicone mold making and resin, and mostly just taught myself everything I needed to know about doll making. Eventually I got into 3D rendering and sculpting, you know, as I sort of needed more and more out of my dolls. But it was a very sort of organic, slow process of self-discovery, artistic self-discovery, if that makes sense. Will Blue be available for custom orders like Pidgin? Eventually, yes. I think I'm going to start her off as a sort of small run. I'm still kind of like discovering who she is as a doll and how she's different from Pidgin, if that makes sense. So I will be making her available hopefully soon, like an early summer, late spring. But I'm still figuring out how exactly I want, what parameters I want to have her customizable, if that makes sense. Why did I choose the name Pidgin? Pidgin, the name, originally was actually a name for a sort of a character or a drawing that I did before I got into doll making. I just had this idea that Pidgin would be sort of a cute name for a girl, and started doing little illustrations of her, and she was sort of like a city dweller, sort of quirky, almost magical, almost like Mary Poppins, but like young and not a nanny, more fashion. But you know, I kind of forgot about the character, and then cut to maybe like 3 years later when I started doll sculpting. I was on my third doll sculpt, and I was trying to figure out what sort of I really wanted to do a character doll, and my partner Eric suggested the name Pidgin that I had come up with, and then sort of the whole idea of her aesthetic and the idea of this sort of like hip city girl came and became very solid for me. And so we decided to call her that, and we changed the spelling to Pidgin, which is sort of the name for any sort of a combination of two languages or two people that speak different languages, and they find a way to communicate based on a common tongue that they kind of understand. And that's what that particular spelling of Pidgin means. And I felt that that was sort of applicable to me and my artistic expression of Pidgin, because it's how I express my ideas of femininity and fashion and gracefulness and that. So yeah, I hope that answers that question. Who is styling pigeon dolls? That is me. I am very, that's sort of the main reason I got into doll making, is because I love fashion and style and beauty and glamour, and Pidgin is the way that I can express those particular ideas about my personal aesthetic. So, you know, I work with people to help me with sewing and help me with sourcing fabrics and that sort of thing, but I really keep my hands in all the designs, and I do all the illustrations, and keep her as personal of an expression as I can. My favorite BJD artist? Well, of course my favorite, and I really truly mean this, is my very good friend Pasha Satrova, who I think Pasha Satrova is the most brilliant and talented doll artist I've ever met and or happen to know. So she's definitely my favorite. The doll artist that really got me into doll making and ball jointed dolls is Marina Bichkova, who has a line of high-end porcelain and resin dolls called Enchanted Doll. I'm a huge fan of hers, and she's really, her dolls are the ones that sort of opened my mind to the idea of like what a doll could be as an artistic expression. Those are my top two favorite doll artists, but there's lots that I love. How long does it take to finish a doll from beginning to end? That really, I get asked that question a lot, and it's kind of a hard one to answer because I do dolls in groups. So the short answer to that question is my waiting list is usually about 5 to 6 weeks right now from when someone orders a doll to when I can finish it. But it really kind of depends on the specifications of that doll and what I have in stock and what I have to find and what I have to create from scratch. So, how long does a sculpt take? A sculpt takes a long time, especially when, I mean, it really depends on how you're doing it. You know, I started hand sculpting my dolls out of La Doll clay, which is a air dry paper clay from Japan, which I always recommend for anybody who's sort of first starting with doll design, because there's a lot of trial and error. You know, if you sculpt it, you let it air dry, and it becomes very light and very strong, and you can sand it and whittle it and kind of make it, you know, if you're trying to create a joint that has a certain range of motion, you can sort of tweak it and you can re-wet the clay and re-mold it. So it's a really good way to sort of get your head around how a joint works and how to put it together. The first doll I made, I used a book called Yoshida Style Ball Jointed Doll Making, which is actually in Japanese. You can find it pretty readily online, and there's also translations for it in English, but the photos are so good that you really can just kind of follow along with the pictures as long as you have the right materials. That's a really great way to sort of get your feet wet as far as doll making and learning the very basics of it. But, you know, Pidgin and now Blue have both been digitally sculpted, so that, you know, it doesn't take as long necessarily to sculpt the doll, but then to print it and to refine it and to test the joints and to resculpt things. It's kind of a hard question to answer. The more you do it, the better you get at it, so it takes less time. But, you know, when I first sculpted Pidgin digitally, and then by the time I had like a physical doll in my hand that was professionally cast and working correctly, it was at least a year and a half. It definitely requires a lot of patience. It's not the kind of thing. And the first doll I made, it took at least a year to of, you know, working on it off and on, but pretty steadily, you know, because there's so many things that go into a doll and putting it together that it can take a very long time. So doll making is not for the faint of heart, and it's not for the impatient. Do Blue or Pidgin have a backstory or personality? A little bit. Personally, this is just my opinion about dolls, is that they tend to work better if their backstory and their personality is a little abstracted. So, you know, of course, you know, I hope that when you think of a Pidgin doll that there's a certain aesthetic and a sensibility and sort of a sense of of whimsy and glamour that comes to mind. But within that, I don't like her to be from any particular time period. I don't want her to be any particular age. You know, she doesn't really have an ethnicity or a particular hair color, or, you know, she's a muse in the ultimate sense of the word. She's really just meant to inspire you, and to inspire myself as well, to talk about fashion and beauty and glamour and her particular take on that. So, you know, that's what I want behind. That's what I imagine Pidgin to be, and Blue is sort of similar. You know, Blue, you know, as I said, she has sort of a heart shape or a tear shaped face as opposed to Pidgin's heart shape. She, you know, I think is very often going to have these sort of tears on her face, whether they're jeweled or painted in colors or sort of tattoos. That's sort of going to be part of her personality. So obviously she's like a little sad and a little melancholy, as opposed to Pidgin, who's a little perkier and brighter. But other than that, you know, not a specific backstory. We don't, you know, there's no like who their parents are or anything like that. They're dolls, so they're muses, and that's sort of the idea behind them. What inspired me to be a doll artist, and how do I stay inspired? Before I was a doll maker, I was an illustrator, and I still do illustration from time to time. And I love illustrating, but artistically speaking, doll making is just the ultimate. You get to be a sculptor and an engineer and a fashion stylist and a designer and a hairstylist and a makeup artist and a photographer, and really just be all these different types of artistic personas. So for me, it's the ultimate. I often say I'm surprised that more people don't, more artists aren't interested in doll making, because it's so satisfying for me. Do I consider making any male dolls? Yes, absolutely. I have been sort of focused, you know, as I was saying, it takes a long time to see a doll from start to finish, and creating Blue here, I've been working on probably for 8 or 9 months before I actually, you know, I just got the first finished prototype of her yesterday, or the day before yesterday, and so it takes a long time. So now that she's sort of becoming real, I'm focusing on her for a little bit, this sort of darker, more melancholy side of my doll expression. But after that, I do think I want to think about doing something that sort of deals with a little bit more of masculinity. I mean, I think if I did a masculine or male doll, he would still be kind of like genderqueer and kind of femme-y, because that's just my aesthetic. And I think as for a doll, it just lends itself to that a little bit better. But yeah, I'm super interested in exploring what a male doll would look like. How did I learn to use ZBrush? Why did I do it, and what are the challenges? ZBrush, from what I heard, it's a computer program that you can do digital sculpting in, and it's primarily used for video game character rendering, but really kind of creating any sort of 3D model. And it was, from what I understood of it, it was sort of what felt the most like real sculpting. So you have a wire mesh, or a polygon mesh that's digital, and you can pull and push and carve into it, and it's a pretty easy to take to program. That said, it's a little bit buggy, and it's not really meant for 3D printing, or it's really, the designers of ZBrush expected most of the designs in it to sort of exist in a digital world, since it's mostly for video game characters and that sort of thing. So it does have its challenges as far as trying to get out of it what you want. I know that there's a lot of other digital rendering programs that a lot of people use that might be a little bit better. I've never used them, so I can't really speak to that. But ZBrush, it's pretty good. It definitely enabled me to create a way more detailed and articulated doll than I had been previously. doing hand sculpting, since you can really just zoom in there and really get super detailed, very tiny hands with fingernails, and it's very good to get a lot of texture and detail, and also because you can sculpt symmetrically on it automatically, that's just such a advantage. So yeah, I would definitely recommend it. It took me, how did I learn to do it? I taught myself ZBrush. So, I signed up for lynda.com, which sort of gives you very basic tutorials in a lot of different computer programs. So I did a little bit of that, but really, knowing that I wanted to make a doll and knowing that I needed to do certain things to create a doll enabled me to execute one. It's such a huge, vast program that I think if you just go in and you try to learn everything that ZBrush can do, it's going to take you years and years and years. But just going in, if you already know how to sculpt, that's the thing. It's a computer program, but it's not going to sculpt for you. So you definitely have to already know how to sculpt and know how to, proportion and anatomy and all those things you want. And if you can go in there and know that that's what you want to make, and you know that you want to create joints, and you know that you need to, you know enough about doll design to know like what the interior cavity of the doll needs to look like in order to function. It's pretty great, but you have to be patient with it because it is buggy. You'll be exporting the left arm and it'll export as the right foot for no reason at all. It's very like that. You just have to be kind of patient with it and find out its little quirks, and you can get through it. But I did it, and Pasha did it, and it's a good program for a doll sculptor. I'll answer a few more questions. Let me get a drink of water real quick. Sorry. You are a boy. Yes, I am a boy. Pidgin is made by a boy. Okay, I'm going to answer one more question, and then I'm going to go. Are you doing any mermaid dolls or angel dolls with sculpted tails or wings? My second doll I ever created, way before Pidgin, was a mermaid doll with a segmented tail, and I loved it. It was really cool. I definitely would love to do that. I've also played around with wings. Right now, I'm kind of focusing primarily on Pidgin being more of like a contemporary fashion doll, so I don't do too much in regards to like fantasy with her. I mean, I like to play with it a little bit, but I don't know, I'm very interested in fashion right now. So, and sort of, a doll's take on what humans wear. So, yeah, not at the moment, but I definitely love mermaids and angels and fairy wings and all that stuff. So who knows? So anyway, yeah, thank you everybody for your questions and tuning in. I hope I answered your questions well. I love you all very much. You mean the world to me. Right.